There's a noise in the temple, but there's weeping right outside the temple gate. There's rejoicing in the sanctuary. There's praise and exuberance in the house, but there's trouble and trauma and despondency and despair right outside the temple gate. So I'm going to tell you what the psalmist suggests. The psalmist suggests that those inside the temple take the glory to the streets. Tell somebody, what I got is too good to keep to myself. What I have is too good to keep to myself. Somebody outside the temple gate wants to know who Jesus is. I said there is enough God for everybody. Tell somebody, everybody. He's enough God for anybody. He's enough God for everybody. And the reason I know that is because he's enough God for me. And if you knew my whole story, you would begin to try to figure out how God could be God for me. But all I got to do is testify and tell you he's enough God for me. With all of my faults, with all of my failures, with all of my shortcomings, with all of my mishaps, with all of my mayhem, with all of my doubts, with all of my fears, with all of my struggles, he's still enough God for me. Tell somebody he's enough God. So whosoever will, just come. Come on in. Because everybody needs what we have. Everybody needs to know who Jesus is. So in the psalm we see a new order. This is no longer just about Israel's worship. No, but now this cry is made to the whole earth. This song springs forth out of a prophetic hope of crowds pouring into the temple with briskness and exuberance. Folks who just a little while ago were on the outside looking in. Now they've got joy. They've got gladness because they too can now sing the song of the redeemed. And so now, because they were once on the outside looking in, they've got a new kind of joy. They've got a new attitude. When the door swings open, when the gates swing wide, they're the first one to come in. And sometimes those of us who were here and took it for granted and didn't understand the full scope of God's favor and the full measure of God's grace, God had to reach past us and look over us and touch somebody else that didn't mind giving him the praise. Says, I call you out of your madness. And now they're glad because they've been included. They're glad because they got access. They're glad because their pain and their worry is now against the backdrop of a God who can ransom, redeem, and deliver them. They're glad because they've been snatched from the lowest of their rural and peasantry reality. And they now too can spring forth into joyful gladness. They're glad because God has extended the borders. They're glad because God has included them. They're glad because they can anticipate an engaging, awesome worship of an almighty God. They're glad because God does not just hear Israel's song, but God hears any song that is ushered up to him. And so the psalmist here this morning seems to understand that for them too, it's like most days, and therefore seeks to suggest this contrasting ideal to the notion of their madness that prevails. The psalmist here seems to understand the fact that they need to come on in. So he says to them, make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all the earth. this cry, this plea, this invitation now goes out to the whole world, to all the inhabitants of the creative order. Unlike most invitations that call on Israel or specific worshipers of our way, this cry is universal. This declaration of praise goes out to the whole earth. It's all inclusive because the implication is that everyone needs a way of escape. Everybody needs release from the madness that prevails. And the only true way out is faith in God. So make a noise, but make a joyful noise. I know you got reason to be sad, but this is a day of gladness. In other words, right in the midst of my trouble, I got a reason to interrupt. I got a reason to put my trouble on hold. I got a reason to stop crying and start rejoicing. I got a reason to dry back the tears and spring forth praise. And so now I interrupt my sorrow with joy. And the psalmist now makes no mention of pain or suffering. If you read the whole psalm, you won't hear any crying in this psalm. You won't hear any anguish in this psalm. You won't hear any suffering in this psalm. Or there are other psalms that talk about sorrow, dismay, doubt, trouble, and anguish. But in this psalm, all of that is presupposed. The psalmist understands that, yeah, trouble is our reality. I know trouble is real. I know I had hell on yesterday. I know I had heartaches on last week. I know I had sorrow on last month. I know I got disaster and disease. I know I got distress and trauma. That's all presupposed, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to move past the context of my pain, and I'm here to move to the way of my joy. And I got to declare to them, I can't go out there confessing to the world how weak I am, and how troubled I am, and how despondent I am. I've got to approach them with joy. I've got to change my testimony. I've got to wear up my witness. Lift up your head, all ye gates, and even lift them up, ye everlasting doors, and the King of glory shall come in. You see, I got a reason to weep. If I took time to languish in my trouble, if I took time to languish in my pain, I would be losing out in my worship.